Hello and welcome to the Biohack Her podcast. I'm Azra Ulagich, your host and founder of Biohack Her. I'm an integrative nutrition health coach specialising in longevity for women, a health and wellness journalist, writer, corporate consultant, and a biohacking advocate. Biohack Her is a space where we can explore ways to optimise our health to live well longer, whether it's through improving our nutrition, exercising, cryotherapy, supplementation, technology, and more. I'll be bringing you information and interviews with the best longevity experts to help you understand what you can do to optimize your health, prevent disease, and slow down or even reverse the symptoms of aging by taking control of your unique bio-individuality. Want to know more? Let's dive in. Hi everyone, today I'm joined by Dr Lucija Sironic. She's a UK-trained medical doctor and a researcher in the field of glycobiology. Having transitioned from practising medicine in a public healthcare system to GlycanAge, a longevity biotech startup, Dr Sironic is curious to pursue the transfer of cutting-edge scientific findings from the lab into clinical practice. At GlycanAge, she works as a researcher and product development scientist and as a lead consultant working one-on-one with clients and business partners who use the GlycanAge biological age test to optimize healthspan. Today, we dive into what the difference is between chronological age and biological age and why it's important to know your biological age, what glycans are and the role they play in biological age, the difference between GlycanAge and biological age, how inflammation impacts glycans and your body, the chronic diseases you can get from long-term chronic inflammation, the lifestyle choices you might be making that are unknowingly impacting glycans and your health. And we chat about my own GlycanAge test results, which were not what I expected. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Hi, Dr. Sironic. Welcome to the Biohack Her podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Azra.
Great to have you here. Let's talk about GlycanAge. It's a company that helps people to understand what their biological age is compared to their chronological age. Can you explain the difference between the two for those that might not understand that there is actually a difference?
Sure. So as you said, you mentioned two terms, chronological and biological age. So chronological age is basically your age since, just dating back to the time when you were born, and we all know what that is. The concept of biological age is a bit newer. It basically denotes how old you really are on the inside, how old your cells are, your tissues are, and that's something that we find really helpful in the field of aging, just to understand better what your disease risks are and how to help you optimize your health a bit better.
So, what are the benefits in understanding what your biological age is? Can you break it down for us?
Yeah, so I would definitely say one of the things that we're seeing today is that obviously we do live longer, and if we want to live longer and healthier, we have to manage our risks better. So I think the first way that the concept of biological age can help us is to help us with as a disease prevention tool. I think that's the first thing. And I think second thing is obviously if we want to put accent on quality of living and quality of life rather than just living longer, that's also where the concept of biological age can help us. So I would kind of focus on those two aspects.
Are you finding that it's becoming more popular to get for people to get their biological age tested?
Absolutely. I think if we had this chat maybe 5 years ago, it would not have been that popular. But I think today, because there are so many different biological age tests, I think more or less almost everybody has heard of this term.
So, how does someone take the test? Walk us through that step by step.
Sure. So, GlycanAge test is a finger prick test. So, it's basically if you've ever seen any relative or friend of yours who might have diabetes, check their blood sugar while pricking their finger, it's basically pretty much the same. So, you prick your finger, you give us a tiny bit of your blood sample, and then we run that sample in the lab quite a few times just to ensure basically quality control. And yes, that's kind of how it works in simple terms.
And how long does it take for the results to come back?
So once the sample reaches our lab, it normally takes about 2 up to 3 weeks maximum. It might seem long, but that's simply because of the procedures and processes that are in uh, place. We do have quite some high tech in place, and it's not something that you can have your result overnight. So it simply takes at least 2 weeks before you get your result.
Okay. Specifically, what are you testing for? What are you looking for?
Hmm.
Are there a numerous number of tests that are
Yeah,
done? Is it just one particular test? I'm curious to know the detail behind the testing that's done.
sure. Sure. So that's actually a really good question. And when we talk about biological age concepts and how you measure your biological age, you can be looking at measuring many different things. What our test looks at is actually the health of your immune system. So immune system is the system in your body that helps you shield yourself from many different dangers from the outside world, including different bugs and other viruses and toxins. And what we look at, as I said, is the health of your immune system. And to be a bit more specific, we look at the level of chronic inflammation, which is, we know something that the level of this chronic inflammation goes up as we age. So what we want to do is get your level of chronic inflammation and then find ways to help you bring it down if it is higher.
Okay, so inflammation, immunity. Is there anything else that you're looking for?
So yes, I would say I would be a bit more specific and say it's chronic inflammation. I think inflammation usually is talked about in a bit of a negative connotation. So I would just kind of distinguish between acute inflammation, which is obviously a good way to protect yourself from the dangers of the outside world. But yes, we look at chronic inflammation, the health of your immune system, and based on that, we derive your biological age.
So, most people would not know what glycans are. Can you provide an
Mm.
explanation of what they are and what they do and how they're linked to determining someone's
Sure.
biological age?
Yeah. So glycans are a bit, yeah, they're, I would say, an underdog, just in biology and in science in general. In simple terms, they're sugars, not the sugars that you would have from foods or from your diet, but the sugars that your body makes. Um, and those sugars you find in many different places in the body at the level of your cells, but also coating many different molecules. And they are important because they tell us about whether your body decides to make and create inflammation in response to a trigger or not really. And we basically harness that fact and that concept, and that's what our GlycanAge test is based on.
How does determining biological age via glycan testing rather, differ
Mhm.
to other methods like DNA methylation used by other businesses? Is it better or is it just different?
I would say, I mean, putting it simply, is just different. Aging is a very complex process, and our current understanding is that many things go wrong. If you're talking about what goes wrong and how many of those things are, there are at least 13 different things, so 13 different hallmarks of aging. We look at one, we look at chronic inflammation, and other tests, such as the ones that are based on DNA methylation, they look at different processes. So essentially, it's just different tests look at different things and measure different aspects of aging. And currently, really, we don't have a test that is a comprehensive test that will look at all the aspects, all the parameters of aging. And I think that's what the scientific community and the industry and academia are actually working quite hard to get to.
So, if I understand correctly, there's nothing out there that tests all the hallmarks of aging against your biological age.
Exactly. Exactly, which
Right.
is why
So,
I think what is quite a popular concept is people doing many different tests. So doing group GlycanAge test, doing a test that's based on DNA methylation, and then trying to get a picture of where they are in terms of aging, looking at these different processes. But I think what's also quite problematic in the field is that, for example, this is something that we see quite often in practice, is that you might get a GlycanAge result, which is good, neutral, or bad. And then a different test, such as a DNA methylation test, might show something completely different. So the question is, whether all these different tests are complementary or not. I think this is still something that we have to solve in the hopefully near future.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point that you make because there can be sometimes, as was in my case, and we'll get into
Mm,
that in a little bit more detail. But in my case, there were conflicting results between your testing and another organization's testing. And so I think that that's a really important point that you've made, that it's not necessarily like for like that we're testing between various
right.
companies. Um, I think it's important for people to understand what DNA methylation testing or DNA methylation indeed is,
Mm,
because not everyone would know that either. So, can you explain that
right.
and provide some detail around that for us, please?
Sure. So, DNA methylation just refers to the process that happens after your genes and after your DNA is made, and it's a process that adds to the quality of then proteins then being synthesized down the line. And this is also something that we see changes with aging, which is what other companies and organizations have used as a principle to build tests on. Um, how DNA methylation changes influence or do not influence inflammation, I think what the current evidence is showing is there is a link between the two, which again is just going back to your point, shows us that you could be aging slightly at a higher rate when it comes to one process and not at such a high rate when it comes to the other process, which might explain why you had results which are good or better with one test or worse with the other test. Uh, but yes, there is certainly a link between DNA methylation changes, inflammation, and all the other hallmarks of aging that we haven't really mentioned so far. But yes, it's all part of the same puzzle.
I think it'd be worthwhile going through some of those hallmarks of aging, if you wouldn't mind as
Sure.
well, just so that people
Yeah.
have a good understanding of what are those contributing factors to biological age.
Yeah, sure. So, the hallmarks of aging story is the current concept of, you can say, theoretical concept of how we understand the aging process. And I would say that in the field, there is a bit of a chasm between groups of scientists who kind of agree with this approach to aging and a groups of scientists who are not so keen on it. But essentially, currently we talk about 13 different hallmarks of aging, which basically mean changes that happen as we age on cellular level. So one of one of those changes is the aforementioned inflammation. Other changes would be that people might have heard about would be telomere shortening, so that it's actually one of the oldest concepts and hallmarks of aging that some other testing companies and organizations use. So as we age, our telomeres that actually contain all of our DNA material, they shorten. Some other hallmarks would be mitochondrial dysfunction. So mitochondria are your powerhouses in your cells that provide your cells with energy. So we know that as we age, um, these these mitochondria tend to be a bit more fragile and not so functional. And some other sort of hallmarks also include, lack of functioning when it comes to nutrient sensing. So your cells recognizing different micronutrients that it needs to be able to live and perform all of the other functions as well. Another, I would say, important one that people might and your audience might have heard about would be autophagy. That well, you basically lose the power to kind of go ahead with this process called autophagy, which basically just refers to the recycling process at the level of your cells. So your cells normally would be able to deal with all the waste they accumulate, but as we age, that functionality is not so viable anymore. So those would be the few that I would just sort of highlight on top of my head that people might have heard about.
Mhm. And so with the autophagy, that's like cleaning up the senescent cells, right? And when you're
Yeah,
talking about
exactly.
the cleanup, yeah.
No, I just wanted to say you just mentioned senescent cells, so obviously that's also one of the things that we notice that happens with aging, and I think there is a lot of talk about senescent cells build up, and that also being one of the sort of hallmarks that contributes to the entire aging process. And we also do see that there is some correlation between senescent cells number and inflammation, but when it comes to GlycanAge, so far we haven't explored this relationship, and this is a question that many people tend to ask us about.
Do you see much of a difference in the test results across different cultures or different age
Mm.
groups? What's the data showing so far?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question. So we definitely see that obviously what influences your GlycanAge and your GlycanAge result, first of all, would be your where you are when it comes to chronological age, but also your other background information such as ethnicity and sex. I would say sex is the other important variable. So we know that women and men do tend to age differently, and that's also something that's reflected in the glycan data. The point on ethnicity is a bit more complex and complicated, I would say. I think what we are seeing more so is actually not the ethnicity, but where in the world you actually live. So, geography and country of residence. We do tend to see that individuals who live in highly developed countries usually tend to have, glycanage, you can say, that's a bit better than individuals living in countries that are not as developed. So I think there is some interesting concept there in terms of both just science and sociology as well. But I think we just need more data to be able to understand that better. And I would say another thing that's important is that this glycan data, for example, when you test yourself now, um, is something that's derived also from your childhood. Not to say that glycans stay the same, but the influences that you pick up on when you're a child and a teenager or young adult do tend to have an influence down the line and later in life as well.
That's a really interesting point, I think, because does things like childhood trauma, as an example, or
Mm.
other epigenetic factors influence glycans?
Yeah, so we haven't really, so in terms of research, we haven't really looked into this yet. We have done some studies when it comes to post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, in war veterans, where we did not see any, you can say, significant changes when it came to glycanage when we compared this group of individuals to control individuals. Um, but I would say definitely things like exposure. So what seems to matter is more so far what we have data on is exposures to different pathogens. So for example, if you compare children who might live somewhere in Europe to children who might live in Southern Africa, simply because of different pathogen exposure in terms of different viruses and bugs, their glycan data from the very start and their immune response to certain things will be different. We haven't tracked these, so we haven't really done so far any studies that would be tracking these different group of individuals depending on where they live for many, many years to say how glycanage would then change and evolve. But we do set that, so we do see that this pathogen exposure and variation in pathogen exposure does leave a print. And you can say that's almost like an epigenetic print, which is what the glycans are all about. They do synthesize that genetic information, but also epigenetic and the pure, influence of environment on your health.
And it might just be worth, again, I don't want to assume that everybody understands some of this terminology. So it might just be
Sure,
worthwhile explaining what epigenetics is for those that don't understand what
sure.
it means.
Sure. So basically, I think everybody or most of people have at some point heard of genes, which make us us. And there are many different genes in our body that contribute to what color of hair we have or how tall we might be. But what we also see is that genes do not provide us a full picture of what might happen to us in terms of disease risk of how healthy we may be. And this is where epigenetics comes in. And epigenetics refers to this to this process of genes undergoing some change, subtle or less subtle change, as influenced by the environment. So basically, if you have in your genetic background that you might have a high risk of a certain disease, what's actually good and positive is that using environmental changes, say lifestyle changes, you can influence that disease risk, and that's what epigenetics really is.
Thank you for explaining that. A little bit more on pathogens. I'm curious as to whether
Mm.
there's been any research post the pandemic, post COVID,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
whether that, as a virus, had any long term impact on glycans. Um, because
Sure.
I think, it'd be really fascinating to see whether there was a spike post COVID in people's glycans. Obviously we've heard the term
COVID.
long term
Yeah.
COVID,
Mm.
bounced around for some months now, if not over a year now. But I'm just curious to see whether there's been any research done around that.
Yeah, so we do actually have a research on long COVID that should start quite soon as a collaboration between our company and some different institutions. So in very short, as a very short answer, we don't have any answers yet. I can tell you anecdotally, I can share that in my experience of working with clients who come to us, who have been regular clients of ours, using GlycanAge tests to help optimize their health, I have seen in a few cases that the impact of long term COVID seems to be associated with the upward trend in GlycanAge, meaning that in some of these individuals, because we have quite a few data points, we can be quite confident to say that their glycanage spiked pretty much because of either some of the symptoms and symptoms of long COVID they might have, and here we can be talking about tiredness or constant breathlessness, or so either it's due to the symptoms or to the fact that actually because of these symptoms they're not keeping up with some of the lifestyle routines they used to have. So on top of my head, I can remember a gentleman who's tested with us a few times, who, because of the breathlessness and fatigue, he had, months and months after he had his COVID episode, he just couldn't do his daily runs anymore. Now it's a question of, has his glycanage gone up because he's not been able to maintain his aerobic exercise? Does it have to do with any changes and switches of the immune system and how immune system responds to certain things? We can't really say for sure, but there's definitely been some change to suggest that following his COVID episode, which was quite harsh, but not harsh enough that he ended up in hospital, he stayed at home, had a fever, felt awful, but he basically after that developed something that definitely sounded like long COVID syndrome. His glycanage went up. So I think this is a question that we are pursuing, and hopefully maybe next time we catch up, we might have some answers to that.
Yeah, fascinating. I'd be really curious to hear what the results are out of that when you guys do that. So, GlycanAge, you mentioned, has a strong focus on inflammation. Can you explain why that is and how inflammation or inflammaging can impact not only
Hmm.
someone's biological age, but their overall health as well?
Sure. So yes, so I think the concept of inflammaging was coined quite some time ago. Obviously, combining the two words inflammation and aging. simply because we do see now, and this is considered a fact, that as we age, the level of this low grade chronic inflammation goes up, and that seems to be secondary to many different things, many different environmental exposures, but also something that inevitably happens as we age, because it doesn't seem that we, at least initially, had been built to, live, to be 150 or even 120 or older. What inflammation does to our body is it almost, you can say, increases how our body responds to certain triggers in a way that your body might recognize certain, good triggers or neutral triggers as something dangerous. And what that ends up in is your body constantly being alarmed about something that might not be an issue in the first place. And it's almost like a vicious cycle, really. And if you combine that with lifestyle choices that might not be the best, that we obviously see is something that is quite prevalent, both in terms of how we look after ourselves actively and passively. And by passively, I mean exposing ourselves to poor air quality, microplastics, and so on. What you have is then increased level of inflammation, which itself is a risk factor and a predecessor of many different chronic diseases. So it's almost an effect and the result, which then basically increases your risk of many different chronic diseases. And here we can be talking about everything from cardiovascular disease, so heart disease, to metabolic disease, which includes things like type 2 diabetes, to dementia and other neurological diseases. So basically, yes, you find chronic inflammation to be that starting point for almost all of the chronic diseases that you can think about.
It's an important consideration, I think, for people to understand how long-term chronic inflammation can impact their health. And you've just
Mm.
highlighted some of those chronic diseases that can lead, that chronic long-term chronic health can lead to. Can inflammation in the body be a sign of other issues that might not have already been identified other than a chronic illness? Could it be lifestyle choices? Could be
Mhm.
autoimmune issues? What other factors could inflammation in the body be a sign of?
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, I think the chronic disease stage is almost like the end stage. So you can have inflammation slowly building up, and if you leave that inflammation to build up over years and decades, then inevitably you end up with a chronic disease. I think what we are definitely trying to do with our tests, and I would say one of the main points and reasons why we want people to test, is to catch that moment before you end up having a chronic disease. So your question now being, what else is it that can lead up, to have this inflammation build up? So it's many different things, and I think here we can mainly be discussing many different lifestyle choices and factors. So say you can be following a nutrition plan that might not work for you, that can be very pro-inflammatory for you, that in a very short while can lead to the buildup of inflammation, and that can then continue in the you know um, near future, and in the years and decades of your life. But there are also other factors that may not be so intuitive. I think one of the things I definitely, when I work with clients, I see happens frequently is what we would say is relative energy deficiency. So I think in healthy individuals who are not professional sports people, who might be pushing themselves a bit too hard, both when it comes to exercise or nutrition that's not following their caloric and micronutrient needs, this is where mostly healthy people, chronologically younger, are kind of almost burning out, which then leads to buildup of inflammation. And with GlycanAge tests, that's where we want to catch them at, and then see how we can help them find a combination of different lifestyle factors and choices that suits them better.
So, in terms of lifestyle choices, we're talking nutrition, it could be exercise, Um, what other ones are there out
So
there?
yeah, so I would definitely say one of the big ones that many people seem to be interested in would be supplements and supplementation, so dietary supplementation, both with the known things such as micronutrient supplementation, but more popular nowadays, sort of so-called longevity supplements. Obviously, exposure to air quality. Maybe if you do live in an area which has really poor air quality, we do see that that also has a substantial impact on GlycanAge, and obviously that's quite worrying, knowing where we are in the world, in the world today, and what everything that is happening. Other things like alcohol intake, tobacco exposure. What else I want to talk about? Sleep, obviously, sleep being super important, and both
What about
quantity and
stress?
quality of your night's sleep. Stress, absolutely. So, stress and stress management, I would say, even sort of more important.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people in this day and age are living with, a fair amount of stress compared to, I
Hmm.
suppose, what we used to 20 years ago,
Yeah,
which, impacts, the body in many different ways. And we can constantly be in flight or fight mode as a result of that. And that can then end up being that low grade long term chronic stress that can cause inflammation in the body, right? So
yeah,
um, I think it's important for people to understand how some of their lifestyle choices can impact inflammation and then have an impact on their biological age. We had a program here recently that aired on TV here in Australia, How to Live Forever, I think it's called, and
okay.
it brought six or so couples together to test their biological age, looking at what are their lifestyle choices, their environmental factors,
Mm,
and so on. And then 12 weeks later, they were tested again. And as a result of implementing certain lifestyle changes, they were able to reduce their biological age within 12 weeks. Is that the case? Do you find that you're able to turn results around in terms of your
mm.
biological age by implementing some changes in lifestyle choices?
Absolutely. I think I think that's the beauty of glycans in a way, and that's something that gives you hope, doesn't give you just a number that's there, that's permanent and set in stone. We do, I think, in terms of the how how long should you be practicing something? How long should this change be in place for before you see the results? I think that's a different question, and I think this really depends on what you're changing and what this implementation is all about. I think with stress management, for example, we did do a small pilot study where some individuals were enrolled in hypnotherapy as a tool to help them deal with stress management, and we tested their glycan age before and after, before obviously at the baseline and then at 3 months, and we didn't see any changes really at 3 months. And if you ask me, and I think we have now more evidence to say that that's just not long enough for such a tool to be helpful for somebody. So I think when it comes to stress management, I think it obviously depends on the cause and the tool and what is it that you're doing to kind of change things around. That will take much longer. But with some other changes, such as nutrition changes, so if you're changing certain things in your diet, or if you're changing your diet fully, if you're adding some supplements in, that's something that we do see changes at 3 or 4 months for sure, as well as with some other interventions. I'm not sure if we're going to touch upon that, but certainly hormone replacement therapy, obviously something that's more talked about in the context of perimenopause and menopause in women, but also seem to be quite important in men as well. That's, for example, an intervention that if you put in place, you do see and can see glycanate changes at 3 months, and quite impressive changes.
I do want to expand on that a little bit more because I think it's an important topic, but I just want to take a step back to what you mentioned about supplements.
Hmm.
what supplements are you seeing? Particularly, you mentioned longevity supplements, and
Mm,
as a biohacker, and there are lots of other biohackers out there as well.
yeah.
I just came back from the biohacking conference in Dallas recently, and there were 3,000 biohackers in attendance there. So I think it'd be
Was
of
that Dave
very
Asprey conference?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it was a really great conference. It was the first time that I went, and that I've been there,
Nice.
and we'll definitely go back again. I did see the GlycanAge team there actually,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
but
Right there.
yeah, it was great. As they were also at the longevity conference in Singapore as well. I bumped into them there too. Um, but I'm curious to know now which longevity supplements are you guys finding that are spiking glycans and
Yeah.
causing higher inflammation?
Yeah. So I think, yeah, I think
We-
supplements are a bit of a Pandora's box, you know. I think, well, you just mentioned the conference in Singapore. I don't know if you're referring to the one that happened in February this year that was solely dedicated to
yeah,
supplements, which was the first ever
that's right.
conference that was solely talking about supplements in the context of aging and longevity. I was able to sort of follow some few talks online, and I think the message from there, the message from that conference sort of aligns to the message I think we have now with GlycanAge, as still at this point in time that we have with GlycanAge, which is we simply don't know for so many of these supplements. We don't have enough data, and we just need to do more science and research. I mean, so far at GlycanAge, the interventions that we've tested historically up to maybe a year and a half ago were more about what I call softer lifestyle changes, things that people are not usually that keen to implement, things like exercise, sleep, diet, and so on. But obviously, the public wants to know more about supplements. So we've been hard at work to do more pilot and real studies with these supplements. So far, what we've tested has been omega-3 supplementation that we do see does lead to some positive changes when it comes to certain glycan data points. I wouldn't say GlycanAge in general because it doesn't seem to have effect on the overall GlycanAge number, and that's only in healthy individuals. Another thing that we've done as a pilot is we've done some work with a company that is all about NAD plus supplementation, not from NAD plus directly, but NAD plus that's basically sourced from nicotinamide, and then I think supplied together with a bunch of herbs. There's some kind of a proprietary formula. And this was, as a pilot study, we did see some notable changes at 1 month and at 3 months when it came to GlycanAge, but nothing massive. Okay, nothing like we've seen a 5 years reduction or 10 years reduction in GlycanAge. I think
Could
so.
that
Those are the
be the
studies.
duration? Sorry to interrupt you, Lucy. There, I just wanted to expand on that one a little bit more. Could that be the duration of how long the supplement was taken for, the NAD plus?
Yes, I think it has to do. So I think when you do a study, right, you have to think about the difference in individuals you have. What are the characteristics of these different individuals that are taking this supplement? How old are they? What's their sex? What's their activity level? Are they, if they're a female, are they perimenopause or the postmenopause? There's so many different factors to take into account, and before I just answer this question about NAD plus, I think it's important to say that in bigger studies, these factors, apart from maybe age and sex, are not usually accounted for. So you read a study and you see, okay, so overall, we didn't see any significant effect of this supplement on a certain metric. But then if you dig deeper, you see that certain individuals responded really well. And then I think the question we have to be asking is why was that the case? What was so special about these individuals? Did they really have low stores of their NAD plus, and then we gave them this supplement, and then this worked well for them. So I think that's something that we're seeing. I wouldn't say as a problem, but something I think definitely that has to be borne in mind when you're reading these studies, or maybe even participating and so on. So with NAD plus, I would definitely say yes, duration is important. Where you get this NAD plus from, which precursor is that? In this case, it was nicotinamide. It could have been NMN. It could have been niacin. It could have been NR. Obviously, many different precursors that if and I've checked this recently. I don't think we have any studies so far that actually compare these different precursors to say which one is better or worse. And I would also say, in terms of their chronological and biological age at baseline, I think that's also an important thing to know. So, yes, I think all of these different factors could have contributed to results being seen as positive or not.
It's interesting, and it will be really interesting to see further research done in that space because, as you highlighted, that conference in Singapore at the National University of Singapore was
Mm,
the first one that's been done on supplements, and it is a billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar industry. Lots of
yeah,
people think that taking supplements is, going to fix so many problems when you really
yeah,
do have to go
yeah,
back to the basics of nutrition and good sleep
yeah,
and maintaining
yeah,
appropriate levels of stress and so on before you look at that. But I think it also highlights the importance of getting regular blood works done as well to
absolutely.
see, well, exactly where are you deficient, what is working,
Mm,
what isn't working, what do you need to supplement for, because so
yeah,
many people will think, oh, I've got this, I've got leg cramps, so I'm going to take magnesium. Sure,
yeah,
80 to 90% of the population are magnesium deficient, but it's still worthwhile getting your bloods done to ascertain exactly what your
absolutely.
levels are. And I'll talk a
Absolutely.
little bit
Yeah.
about my blood works recently as well, following on from the GlycanAge test that I had too, which revealed a few interesting things for me too. But yeah,
I
I
would
think you've
say, I
made a
would
really
say,
important
yeah,
point
there
there.
is another important point that was brought up at this conference. And so this conference, as you said yourself, was organized by the National University of Singapore and the Healthy Longevity Center there, which is led by Professor Andrea Meyer, who is, the face in terms of academia and longevity. And her group did really one fascinating, study. It's not even a study. It's mainly, but basically what they did is they bought all the possible, I think it was NAD supplements from Amazon or somewhere, and then they tested for what's
Oh,
actually in those
yes.
supplements, and then you see that
I
actually,
know.
on the label it says, it contains this and that, but in reality it doesn't contain any of that. And I think people forget that the supplement industry, a multi-billion dollar industry, is not regulated, and you can sell anything you want. There is no governing body that checks, what's
That's
inside,
right.
what's inside. And I think, so I would say that's another thing I would definitely think about. If somebody is in supplementation, actually, what are they taking? Where did they get this supplement from? And I think, we're talking here about safety as well. But yes, I think this conference was a great introduction to what we should, the conversations we should be having around supplements. And, yeah, supplements in general, but especially in the sort of context of aging.
I completely agree. And I remember sitting there looking at the results that came up on the screen in regards to the NMN testing that they did. And everybody was very surprised. There was an audible gasp in the audience when the results were revealed. And we some of us did ask for the companies to be named because obviously none of us, even in the audience, wanted to be taking NMN that was filled with fillers. And there were quite a number of, from memory, there were quite a number of the NMNs that they tested that had no NMN in it at all,
Imagine
or
that.
very minimal
Mm,
amount of NMN, which was very shocking and disappointing. And so, what would you recommend that people look out for in terms of supplements? Is it looking at the company's regularity of third party testing as an example?
mm. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's that's something that one can do right now before. I mean, I do have hope that the longevity industry and academia in the context of aging research might come up with certain guidelines or white papers around this. And I think one of the things that has been developed so far, nothing to do with supplements, but to deal with these biomarkers of aging, so standardizing these. So I hope that something similar will be put in place for, for supplements, and that we in the future might have some regulation around, whether each company might need to have some third party testing, for example. So yeah, so I would definitely recommend that you look out for that. Yeah, other than that, it's really hard to say, because you don't, in such big sea of so many different supplements, you people usually go for something that's affordable, obviously, something that might have been recommended to them by their friends, family, relatives, or a biohacker they might have heard, speak at a conference, or a researcher. But we really don't know what's inside, and I think that's quite a scary thought to have. So yeah, I mean, any third party testing would be a big plus. And I think I would also go with somebody, not somebody, but a company that does have some history and some experience in doing what they do, and have been recommended by certain experts. Obviously, you never know if somebody was paid to recommend certain things. Obviously, that can also be quite a tricky thing to know. But yes, going by the recommendations, and any sign of any regulation or testing of sorts.
Great points. In regards to regulation, there was a talk at the conference about that, and
Mm,
I do recall that there was a fair amount of consensus that there should be regulation, or we should be looking at some form of regulation around supplements moving forward. I think the challenge that they highlighted was across different countries, different continents.
hmm
It varies. Obviously, here in Australia, we've got TGA, for medical drugs. In America, there's FDA. I'm not sure what the one is in Europe where you are, but that I think that was probably one of the hurdles that they felt that they had to negotiate in terms of trying to achieve consistency with supplements, across the globe,
hmm
in order to protect people's interests. So I guess watch that space, and maybe at the next longevity conference there'll be some further information that's provided from from Professor Mai's team at the next conference. I think they're going to have another one next year. So
Yeah, I think
I
so.
look
I think
forward
I think I
to
think the feedback was amazing, and I think people want that, and I think they really managed to get really good panel of speakers and contributors. So I
yeah.
think it was quite successful. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a fantastic lineup, and well worth attending. So let's jump over into my GlycanAge test, because in my
Yeah.
conversation regarding my own results, it was explained to me that the results from the GlycanAge tests that I had, that sometimes high results in inflammation can be due to high fitness levels. I think actually you and I had this conversation. But I was
Mm,
thinking about it, and fitness has been found in many clinical studies to be one of the best biohacks anyone can do to maintain, longevity. So, why are results showing athletic performance with indicators of high inflammation, and how's GlycanAge calibrating these results? Has there been any further work
mm.
done in that space at all? Or, I mean, you touched on it a little bit earlier that burning
Yeah,
yourself out, or being, going, too hard at it in terms of your exercise routine can cause high inflammation. And I think, reflecting on it, I think I actually did that test straight
at
after
the
gym
time. hmm
at the
Yeah.
time.
So
I
I
was
think
thinking back and I thought,
so. Yeah. Yeah. So I would say that. So we haven't, I think that's something that we would like to do. It's on our to-do list, and I think we have found a way to pursue this further, would be to test actually GlycanAge in sportsmen, actually do some kind of a pilot study. But anecdotally, I can tell you that from some of the sportsmen that we have worked with, we would usually see GlycanAge to be raised, especially if they are, in the high season where their training load is quite high. I would say so. That's something. Obviously, professional sportsmen are professional sportsmen for a reason, and I think the stress that they face on a daily basis in terms of exercise, and maybe sometimes lack of recovery, especially in the high season training is something that would be reflected on GlycanAge. In other people like us, recreational, maybe sports people, we do see that it's not about being fit that leads to having a high GlycanAge. It's about the relationship is you are pushing yourself, you are fit, which is great, but the recovery is not there to support you and to get the benefits from exercise. So I can tell you about an example of a female client I had that I've seen a few times. A lady who's really super fit. I mean, her body composition is at a level of professional sports people. She was in her 50s and in perimenopause as well, and obviously that's a period that women go through that is really challenging in terms of hormonal changes. And she was doing HIIT trainings twice a day, 6 days a week. And we couldn't, and she only told me this, in our second or third consultation. We couldn't figure out why her GlycanAge, it wasn't that high, but it wasn't what it was meant to be. So this is where we kind of think, I'm not saying that everybody does this, but I'm saying that sometimes people do push themselves too hard, and then the benefits of exercise they would normally get, that obviously challenging yourself and exercising in high intensity zone is great, but you have to know how much of that you need and how much of that you can deal with. So I would say that the relationship between GlycanAge or situation where glycan is higher because somebody is pushing themselves relatively too hard and is basically in energy deficit all the time, that can be dealt with, not at the expense of losing your fitness. It just means acting a bit more adding a bit more active and passive recovery.
Sure. I think when I received my results, it prompted me to try to understand why the results were what they were in terms of my inflammation being high. Because as you and I discussed, I felt like I was doing all the right things, that my nutrition was good, that I was
Mm.
exercising, perhaps, maybe a little bit too much as you've highlighted. I don't feel that I had my stress necessarily under control, but it prompted me to go and do some more blood works, to do a bit more digging to
Mm-hmm.
see, well, what is causing this inflammation? And it was really interesting that my inflammation markers came back high in those blood test results as well, which identified that I'm actually celiac, which I was not aware of
Oh.
the fact that I was celiac. And so I had no symptoms of celiac disease at all. I had been diagnosed many, many years previously with leaky gut syndrome, which I had
Mm.
addressed. The symptoms had disappeared. But looking back on it now, it seems that it was a misdiagnosis, and that in actual fact, I was probably celiac all the way back then. And my body had just got better at managing, the symptoms. But I had not completely eliminated gluten, because obviously I wasn't eating bread or anything like that, but gluten is hidden in
Mm.
so many other, food
Everywhere.
products. And so when you're celiac, even, you know,
Mm.
the tip of a pen, in terms of gluten can cause inflammation in the body. So that, I think, was one of the great outcomes of me doing the GlycanAge test, was that it prompted me to go and do some further digging with a functional medical practitioner, that we were able to then really pinpoint down exactly, well, what is causing this inflammation. And as a result of that, I've made significant lifestyle changes
Mm.
to address that. So I'll have to do another one to see
Yeah.
what the results are. But I just think that was a really good outcome for me in terms of identifying that, because if I'd have continued the way I had been continuing, then inflammation would have continued. It would have led to, goodness knows what. As we've highlighted earlier in this conversation, that long-term inflammation can lead to so many other health issues.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was definitely one of the benefits for me in getting the GlycanAge test done. So there you go. I thought I'd share that with you, following on from
No,
our
that's
original conversation.
No, that's really good, and I think I think people use the test many different ways. Sometimes people just want to see where they are, how well they're looking after themselves. There are people who are not looking after themselves and then use the test to say, okay, I need some me time now. I need to focus on my health. And for some, it's a wake up call one way or the other. So I'm not happy that you had the diagnosis, but I'm happy that you actually took it on board and seriously, and that you pursued it. And I think that is the way to use our tests and some of the other different tools that do exist in this health span optimization space.
For sure. And I know that we chatted about another case study that was highlighted actually on your website regarding a lady that also had received results that she did not anticipate and ended up discovering she had a chronic illness. So could you expand
Mm,
on that one a little bit more for our listeners? Because I just think it does highlight the benefit of getting these type of tests done and
yeah.
you know how it's proactive personal health management is what I think is the
Mm,
future, and this is something that companies like GlycanAge can support people to do
mm.
in order to be able to capture something hopefully early on so that they can address it as quickly as possible.
Yeah, so I think what you just said before you answer your question is you're highlighting how being proactive and testing certain things, even when everything seems fine, is something to do. And I think yes, that is a way forward. There is some slight doubt about certain tests that might be a bit too much in depth, and I mean maybe we can touch upon that. Things like whole body MRIs and so on. That you'll see some clinicians say, well, it's a great thing to do because we can pick up on anything we see, and then you'll see some who say, well, we might find something that's not even relevant to this person's health. So I think yes, I think overall, all these, being proactive is good, but there are some boundaries or some limits that we have to kind of discuss further. But yes, I think you referred to this lady that tested with us as you did, basically proactively, and she had a bit of a higher result than she expected, and she went to dig a bit deeper, and there were signs of developing malignancy, so you can say a type of a cancer in her case, which was not something that she expected. I haven't worked with her, so I don't actually know too much detail apart from what's sort of published in the interview we had with her on our website. But I would say it's definitely not the only case that I've come across working as I've worked in GlycanAge. I've had some clients who might not have that diagnosis, but who actually, having done the GlycanAge test, found out, did some other blood work after that because they've not done blood work in a while, and saw that they were insulin resistant. And obviously, that is something that is quite common these days. It's a very pro-inflammatory condition. It's not good for your metabolic health and health in general. And that also then led them to implement some changes and look at their lifestyle with a different set of eyes. So I think it could be a good step to see where you are. And if something's not quite right, then you can't really put all of these pieces of puzzles into one big puzzle together, then you end up investigating a bit further down the line. And I think, yes, that's how I would recommend using our tests in general.
Fantastic. I just wanted to circle back to HRT because we were going to flesh
Yeah.
that out a little bit more, and I think particularly for my listeners, it's a conversation worth having. Can you expand a little bit more around how HRT can impact inflammation in the body, and I suppose particularly for perimenopausal or menopausal women, because obviously different stages in terms of that change in life. Some might be trying to do it naturally, others might be on HRT. Every woman has a different experience when going through perimenopause or menopause. So curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. So I think this is one of the most exciting areas to sort of further do some work in for us at GlycanAge. So it really all kind of comes back to the differences in how women age versus men. So in men, how they age, it's very linear. There are no big events physiologically that happen that would make them age faster. For us women, the things are slightly different. So obviously, upon that transition from having a regular cycle to perimenopause and then menopause, that seems to be a block of time where we do really age in a much faster way. And I can tell you what that means in terms of GlycanAge. We've had some few cases. So if you imagine you follow up a lady in her 40s, late 40s, beginning of 50s, her GlycanAge initially being in the 20s, 25 to 30, and then jumping to over 55 when she reaches her post menopause. So what happens is that inflammation level does go up. Many different things happen, obviously sex hormone and other hormone changes. So what we've seen so far is the question was, okay, if we try and fix that hormonal balance, at least sex hormone balance, with HRT, so with hormone replacement therapy, could we see change in GlycanAge? Meaning, could we reverse that GlycanAge to be what it had, what it used to be before? And the answer to you in 99% of cases is yes. Can we reverse it fully to what the GlycanAge used to be before? Not always, but we definitely do see that GlycanAge responds to this intervention of hormone replacement therapy. Now, depending on woman's needs, whether that's just estrogen or whether that's a combination of estrogen and progesterone, whether you add in testosterone at some point as well. But I would say that in terms of hormones and which hormone is the most important one here, we're talking about estrogen. So estradiol being the one that when you fix its own balance, when you fix the balance of this hormone, you're actually making your glycans a bit more anti-inflammatory, which then means that your glycanage comes down. And I think this is really exciting data. And in the longevity space, and we recently had one interesting webinar on the topic that was held by my uh, colleague. The title of the webinar was "Is estrogen a longevity drug?" And I think that's a question that many people are asking now, because not only do we see the positive changes in terms of inflammation and other health benefits in women, we do see the same in men. Obviously, in men, we wouldn't be replacing estrogen, we would be replacing testosterone if that is needed. But it seems that on the level of cells, again, even in men, it is estrogen that's the most active component that's actually changing things around. So I think that's very exciting stuff, and I think we do have a lot more work to do to be able to be a bit more not just precise when it comes to personalizing these treatments, but actually understand when would be the best time to start it. As you said, many women are starting HRT now in perimenopause. How long should you be on HRT? That's another good question. So I think the world is kind of waking up when it comes to this important topic, and important topic that really defines how well and how fast we age.
Yeah, I completely agree with you because I think back to what it was like maybe 10, 15 years ago, only really. And HRT was such a taboo, acronym back
Hmm.
then. There was a lot of misconception, a lot of misinformation out there around HRT, and it was something that I was even taking on board, that because when I went through menopause, I did not take HRT, and as a result of that, in the recent blood works that I had, which identified that I was celiac, it was also identified that I had very, very low estrogen levels.
Mm.
Um, and so while I don't have any symptoms, menopausal symptoms or anything like that, I'm 55 years of age, so I'm postmenopause now. It was as a result of the new research that's come out around the importance of estrogen. It was something that my doctor and I had a conversation around.
Mm.
And so now I am starting to supplement with estrogen to be able to bring those levels back up, estradiol in particular, which is the one that you highlighted. So I think it is an important consideration for women, um, because the dial has moved around HRT, and
Mm,
I was one of those people who was against HRT because of the information that was available at the time. For
mm,
me, it was understood that it wasn't good for you, right?
yeah.
And that now has been proven to be incorrect. And so I wanted, to make it really clear that, from my perspective, that, it is important for us as women to be looking at HRT. And I think it's everybody's
Mm,
individual choice as to whether they do it or not. And look, I went through it and had no problems with my symptoms and got through it naturally, quote unquote, without HRT. But when you look now at the research, as you've just highlighted, and the importance of estrogen in terms of longevity and anti-aging, that then really, I think, strengthens the case for it as well, because we tend to age more rapidly, as I understand it, if we don't
mhm.
have estrogen. And that's
Yeah,
certainly
exactly.
the research that I've been reading recently from numerous doctors who specialize in women's health have been
Mm.
highlighting that in particular.
Yeah, and I think you touched upon a really good point here, which is to do with research and evidence, right? It's about evidence and research being available, but then, knowing how to evaluate it and how to read it and how to extract in the right possible way the most important information, which is exactly what didn't happen now 20 years ago, I think that was beginning of the 2000s was a big study that looked at HRT and menopause. And I think, you see 20 years passed and we're still trying to figure out how to actually convey the right message, the evidence-based message. And I think that's one of the really important challenges of this industry, longevity in particular, is, having the evidence, knowing how to use it, not tweaking it to what you think it should be, but actually having and making decisions that are evidence-based. And I think that is the right way forward. It might not be something that people would like to hear, because I think there is a lot of impatience about, knowing what's a thing, what's a supplement to take, what you should be doing to target this, and that. But actually, we have to be honest and say that we do really need more data and then better quality data, because some of the studies that have been done in the past are just not so good quality. And I think we have to be honest to say that if we want things to be evidence based and to be safe and to be good, that just takes some time. And I think hopefully with this revolution in tech that we are living through right now, things will be a bit faster.
Yeah, for sure. I think tech will absolutely contribute to the future in the longevity space, and we're already seeing that. And I saw that even at the conference in Dallas recently. How do you see biological age testing evolving in the future, and what else is GlycanAge looking at in the longevity space?
Yeah. Wow, that's a really good question. I think it kind of goes back to what we discussed at the start. There isn't one single test that tells you about everything about the entire aging process. So I'm either seeing things starting to fall into place and to have different tests in mind, that we figure out how to be complementary with each other. I think that is probably something that could happen in the near future. In the distant future, whether there will be one test that you do, you prick your finger once and you have all the answers. I think that could happen, but I think that's actually years from now. At the GlycanAge, I think so. I do so some of the work that I do with GlycanAge has to do with product development, and obviously we have our test, the GlycanAge test, that is available to everyone wherever you are in the world. But we also do have some other tests that are being developed as we speak. Some of those will be preview to some slightly different audience, so more clinicians and researchers. But what we're definitely trying to do, nonetheless, in any case, is using that glycan data in the best way possible. And I think apart from biological age concept, we do have enough years of research and research study published to say that we can use glycan data to try and even help prevent and I would say predict some of these chronic diseases that we talked about. And I think that's the most exciting part. I think the strongest data there is around cardiovascular disease, so heart disease, so talking about, atherosclerosis, talking about incidence and risk of heart attacks, for example. And then the other sort of area that we have quite strong evidence for is metabolic health, talking about type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, and so on. So we're definitely developing to try build some more specific tests to use the glycan data for disease prediction of these specific conditions that I just mentioned. So yes, and then the third thing would be what we just talked about now, which is women's health, something that we've had in kind of plan for a while now, but basically using glycan data to be able to, I wouldn't say predict perimenopause. I think that's still quite challenging, but to be able to give women more information where they are they leaning towards that period of life, and then to be able to start hormone replacement therapy if indicated and if the right choice for each individual. So I think those would be the three main areas that we are working hard on.
Exciting times ahead. Look, you've been so generous with your time today, and it's been a really
That's okay.
fascinating conversation. So, thank you so much. I just wanted to ask you one more question. What does it
Sure.
mean to you to live well longer?
Ooh, so the thing is, chronologically, I'm 28, and I don't know. I kind of tend to hang out always with people who are a bit chronologically, at least, older than me, and then everybody thinks that I'm really young and that I'm not wise enough to kind of provide answers to such a question. But I think so far in my 20s of years of living, what I've seen to be important in terms of life and quality of life and living well is, yes, looking at the data and, investing in your health, but always finding the balance, not being too obsessed with the data points. I think that's something that I've also learned for myself. And I think to be in a good place, not just physically, but also mentally. I think people forget that you live inside your own head as well. And I think, looking after that space is also quite important, so that you can just spend good quality time with people you love. I think that would be the most important thing.
Lovely. Dr. Sironic, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that's a wrap for today's podcast. Thank you for tuning in. And if you'd like to learn more about biohacking, go ahead and sign up on my website at www.biohack-her.com to get a free copy of my 5 top biohacks to get you kick-started. While you're there, you can also check out my blog page for more tips on biohacking. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, you can do so on Apple, Spotify, and Google Play. Let us know if there's anyone you'd like us to talk to in particular, and we'll endeavour to get them on the podcast. Until next time, remember to live well longer.